All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Leading with AI or Leading with Artificial Intelligence. My name is Catherine Baker, and I am with School for CEOs as the Business Development Director. Now, School for CEOs really strives to help all of your senior business leaders from a couple steps down from the C-suite all the way up to actually the CEO position, really enhance their abilities as leaders, find out what makes leadership unique to them, and how they're going to take your companies or their companies to that next step, to the future, and really strive to energize those people around them. Now, there's lots of different tools and techniques and ways to increase your ability as a leader, one of which is with artificial intelligence, or AI. So today, I have with me Richard Marshall on the line. Now, Richard is a rather extraordinary person who is the general manager of Scotland right now for the Chelsea Apps Factory. Among many other things, Richard is a software inventor. He is an entrepreneur and a futurist, so very well equipped and adapt and able to explain to us what exactly is artificial intelligence and how are we going to embrace it to become better leaders. We might be nervous, we might be scared, we might be excited, we might just not really understand the value of AI, and that's why Richard is with us today. Now, as I mentioned before, today is a very interactive webinar, so if you have any questions, please send them in the group chat, and I'll be able to ask Richard these questions throughout the program. But without further ado, Richard, enlighten us to a little bit more about AI.
Well, thanks very much for that introduction, Catherine, and welcome everybody to the webinar. And so I've performed quite a number of different roles over the years in terms of engineering leadership. I have been a CEO, I've been a CMO, I've been a CTO mainly, and various other roles within that. And the thing that I find that is absolutely fascinating about the world of AI is that it is a significant change. And how do we know it's a significant change? It's because we see such a groundswell of panic, fear, news in public media as well as the tech media about AI with this context of the end of the earth. You know, AI is everything from the singularity through to, your job loss with robots. And the reality is that it is a change, but it's a fundamental change, but it's like every other fundamental change, we're going to see some major changes in the way that things happen, and that's why we're seeing the fear. Now, this picture that you're seeing here relates to the Locomotive Act of 1865, when horseless carriages were required to have the man walking in front with the red flag so as not to scare the horses. This, of course, was the beginning of a complete transformation of society, and that led to panic everywhere. And people weren't able to embrace it because they were terrified of it. It was such a big change. We saw a little bit of that when we came in with the internet, where people were panicking about internet would result in all of our high streets shutting down, and that all of the local stores would vanish. And some of that's happened, but not very much. And similarly, the horseless carriage people, kept on. They turned into building cars. If you previously built carriages, you moved into cars. So this is the first time recently, well, so maybe since the internet arrived, that we've seen such a groundswell of fear, change, and commentary about technology. And this, to me, indicates that this is a fundamental change that we're going to have to address. And we're going to have to address that as a leader in the organization. How are we going to do that? So this presentation is broken into 3 sections. And indeed, please keep the questions coming through by section, or keep sending them into Catherine and we'll address them. It is interactive. So the 3 sections are, this AI stuff's coming in a way. So what can I do about it? Why should I care about it? What does it do? What does it mean to me as a leader, and how do I manage through it? And then that leads into the aspect of what I'm calling nimble leadership. So it's the ability to lead in times of extreme change and where there is fear. And yes, there's always an element of fear, etc. at work, but this is not just turning the handle and keeping things going normally. And therefore, you need to have a very firm approach to helping people through that, especially if their job changes or if people are concerned about the introduction of AI impacting their livelihoods, etc. And then I'm going to move on to the creation of a vision and the importance of a vision when you are leading. So that's the three sections that we're going to finish up with a little bit about how do you get started with it, how do you create that vision, and how do we lead forward on it. So if you were digging a big hole, which would you prefer to use? The trowel or the big quarry digger? Well, I'm guessing most of us would prefer to use a big quarry digger, and this is effectively what we're looking at. Most technologies come in as a force multiplier, so they enable us to do more with less, to do stuff more quickly. Now, you wouldn't dig your garden using the quarry truck. You'd use the trowel. If you want to go plant roses, you're going to use it. So it's important to realize that you can't apply any technology everywhere. You have to use the right technology in the right place. So what we're really seeing is that AI is something that enables us to take repetitive tasks and make them much faster. Now, that's a much easier thing to handle. It's about augmenting the human. It's a way of, we're not coming in and replacing everybody with killer robots. We're coming in with technology that will help us do more work. And this is a fundamental change that enables the humans to focus on what they're good at. But what we see that's happening is if we look at this chart here, it's showing what I'd like to call the enterprise AI maturity level. So it's a maturity model. So maturity model, low, medium, and high. So how many companies are actually using AI? The uptake level is very low. That's what we find. So that if you look at the number of companies with high level of AI maturity, they are few and far between, and most of them are the big tech companies like Microsoft and Google and IBM. And you really need a magnifying glass to see that blip on the chart. The vast majority of companies are sitting down there wondering, what do I do with this AI stuff? How do I know that it can help me, but I don't know how to get started? And this is quite normal for any technology launch, any new technology coming out. So what we're looking at is how do we get people moving up this maturity chart? But first of all, let's have a look and see, why is it that most people are still stuck down there and that we don't really know how to get started? It's particularly perplexing because there's a huge amount of technology, fundamental technology out there. So Microsoft, Google, IBM, Amazon, Facebook, and some others offer these incredible toolkits. But it's like having a big pile of Lego in front of you. Many people look at that big pile of Lego and they don't know what they want to build. They're struggling with it. So these tools that are available enable you to create stuff. But the question is, what stuff do you want to build? Is it the little house that you want to build on the left? Or is it the Millennium Falcon model, the huge number of parts, the huge complexity of it? And this, strangely enough, is a huge handicap for people. So you have all those tools, but you don't know what to do with it. So I call this the cognitive concept gap, because we know that there's these platform services out there. Many of them you can use for free. You can start using them very quickly online. But what do we use them for? And this is the thing that is holding back the adoption of AI in the enterprise. And this is where leadership becomes so important. We need to connect the people at the top with the technology at the bottom in a way that makes them more efficient, so that it gives them that massive multiplier effect that we're talking about. So this is really the thing that we need to look at with the disruption. But what's really fascinating is that leadership is very different from management. And I think that's generically true. That's nothing to do with AI. Management is often confused with it. And here that we're seeing that you need true leadership, so that we need to move off the illusion of control. So a lot of the time, people are looking to manage things, so that contrary to what you need to do in times of change is you need to let go. I always love the quote from the famous Italian racing driver who said that if you're still in control, you're not going fast enough. And that is something that is totally true in AI. So you can't control this, but you can inspire. So as a leader in a business that needs to adopt AI, we really need to not worry about control, but we need to act. And we need to make that action inspirational for our team so that they're going to follow us. So that means that instead of seeing a threat, we're going to see an opportunity. Classic. We're seeing change, but instead of change, don't think of it as change. It's a refresh. It's about doing things better. It's about making things more modern, more efficient, easier to work with, more suitable for humans. It's about augmenting that process. So refreshing the way you do things rather than no more change. It's not this too shall pass kind of change that employees are all too often familiar with. It's about ensuring that people understand that this is actually changing materially how they're going to work for the better. Similarly, we can look at legacy systems. And very often legacy systems is based on it's thought of as being a land anchor. So you think that the legacy system is holding you back. No, we can't move into AI. We can't move into mobile. We can't use blockchain, whatever it happens to be, because we have 2-year backlog of stuff on our mainframe. Don't think of it like that. You have to move into a mainframe that says that it's a foundation for success, and we can layer on top of that foundation. And solid foundations are very good for building. So don't think of legacy as a thing that's holding you back. You have to change that mentality to think that we are looking at a dynamic foundation. And similarly, one of the most common reasons for not adopting new technology, and especially not adopting AI technology, could be called process blockage. So people are blocked because the process is well defined, and this is kind of caught in that internet meme of the computer says no, we can't do this because the process says that we don't do it. Well, instead of thinking about process as being blocked and process as a reason for saying no, and then we move that over into optimization. We're making these processes slicker. We're making it easier to do your job. And then finally, probably the biggest threat to all process and all new things is corporate inertia. It's like, yeah, we know we need to do this, but we don't know where to get started. We've got all this other stuff to do, all sorts of reasons and excuses for not moving into it. And we need to get out of that corporate inertia into a continuous innovation model. And continuous innovation is something that's obviously very heavily promoted for startups, but it is a key element of that nimble leadership. It's the ability to look at something and say, well, we need to change this, and maybe that wasn't quite correct, so we're going to change it further. And it's about having a process that lets us do that in small increments rather than biting huge chunks off. Because if you do bite huge chunks of change off, you will see that it doesn't work. Now, how do we actually do that? So it's very easy for me to sit here and talk about viewing things that are day-to-day problems as opportunities. But how do we actually build the foundations that we need for this nimble leadership that's going to take us through? Well, first of all, you need to be confident. And one of the biggest issues that we see is that people are afraid of new technology. Systematically, people are afraid of new technology. And it's not the technology itself normally. What people are often afraid of is the fear of embarrassment, or they're terrified of being embarrassed in front of their colleagues. So if you're at the C-level, or if you're levels below, you may have been tasked by the board or by the chief exec, go out and find out about this AI stuff and make something happen, but you don't know where to get started. What you need to do is build up some confidence to take you past that hump, to get over the hump of, I don't know what it is. Actually, it doesn't matter knowing how it works in particular, any more than you need to know how a fuel injector works when you're driving a car. It's just something that's there for you to use as a motor. You don't need to know that. So confidence is very important, because if your team is nervous about how we deliver things, your confidence will pass on to them and become much more powerful. Similarly, vision is fantastic. So where does AI fit into the corporate vision? This is something that I think is tremendously important. If you have a vision, people will follow you. If you think that AI is something that's not going to really make a big impact, or it's not terribly important, they're not going to be terribly interested in it. So that vision has to be achievable. It has to be near. It has to be understandable, and it has to radiate that confidence. So we see our business going in the direction of using AI because we are going to create super user experiences that are personalized and customized to the detail of those users without them having to enter their own data, for example. It's going to understand them. It's going to help them. Now, that vision needs to be coupled with a culture that says that we collectively are working on this and that AI is augmenting all of us. AI is not going to come and kill my job. It's something that's going to make us as a company better. And in order to achieve that culture, we have to communicate, and that communication is tremendously important. So these are the 4 foundations for leadership. They're not that different from any other kind of leadership, but in the case of AI, we really have this fear and the whole red flag in front of the motor car thing that we have to get over. And it's interesting because most leaders are obviously in the position that they are not experts in this, and they feel that they have to be. Now, what I would say is that you should not worry about it. There's lots and lots of acronyms, TLAs, 3-letter acronyms being thrown around. There's lots of stuff out here. So what I did was I put together a quick cheat sheet. And frankly, if you're dealing with AI, this is all you really need to worry about. In order to get over that concept gap, you need to know that these things exist, but not how they work. And a lot of people get hung up on that. How does it work? Am I going to break something? No, you're not going to break something. So let's talk quickly through these 8 little elements. So the foundation of a lot of things is NLP, natural language processing, not to be confused with neuro-linguistic skills. NLP here reads language and extracts what are called intents from it. So it'll take in a sentence and it will say, see that you've got an action in mind. So you could say, what is the balance in my current account, and it extracts that you want to know your balance, and it knows that it wants that you know that you want to use the balance from your current account rather than a savings account or whatever. So NLP is very advanced. There's lots of tools there. And so Microsoft Lewis, for example, you can just go in and you can start training it. Now, training is important because you have to come back and show a lot of sample ways of expressing itself. You have to make it rich. You have to teach it. But from the purposes of leadership, all you need to know is that you can't just throw this out there. You have to train it. And I'll come back to some examples of that later. Now, the opposite of the obviously language processing is language generation. So creating text from data so that something drives a template. So you might create financial reports, for example. Those are very commonly reported. So on Wall Street, you see a lot of the filings for the investment commission. They are automatically created through the use of templates and through the use of financial data systems. Now, sitting on top of both NLP and NLG is voice recognition and voice generation. So if you have an Amazon Echo, an Alexa device, or a Google Home, then when you're speaking to it, what it actually does is take your voice, convert it into text, then understand that text, then apply the intents, do whatever it is, and then they're going to produce text, which is then converted back into voice. So when Alexa or Siri or whoever talks to you, it's actually done through text. So these voice recognition and voice generation layers are sat on top of the underlying text layers. It doesn't go directly from voice straight into intents and actions. Now, talking about Amazon Echo, Alexa, and Google Home and the other devices, if you don't have one of these at home or in the office, you should definitely be buying them. This is the future of interaction, and even if it isn't exactly as it's going to be in the future, it just changes the way you interact with things. And as part of that leadership, as part of that confidence aspect, you really need to be using these things on a daily basis, because once you get used to them, you'll see where the edges are, you'll see the opportunities. So, for example, there is a very well-known entrepreneur called Sharmadean Reid, who operates in the hip-hop nail varnish area, which you may or may not have heard of. But anyway, Sharmadean's an amazing lady because she is a beautician. However, she has an incredibly inspiring view of technology. And when she gets home, she has an Alexa skill that she has set up that enables her to say, how much money did we make in the salon today? And it tells her how many clients were and how much they paid, etc. Now, that is an incredible capability that she saw through using these devices. So it's that practical interaction enables you to jump that concept gap just as she had done. So how do these things work underneath? So we go down underneath language processing. Well, a lot of that stuff is done through language understanding, and that understanding is based on knowledge, which in turn is based on models. So you don't need to know about this stuff any more than you need to know about deep neural networks and how they work. in order to make this stuff happen. But what you do need to know is that the knowledge is important. You have to structure that knowledge. Some people use the taxonomy as a name for it. People talk about knowledge management and other things. But basically, you need to be able to link these things together in a way that the machine can understand that a bird, for example, typically has feathers, and it has wings, and it has 2 legs and a beak. That's knowledge. That's a model for a bird, and then you can start looking at specifics. Now, not all birds can fly, but if it can fly, then it's probably a bird, but it might be an insect. So you can start looking at the way these things are structured and defining the knowledge in a way that you can extract it. Now, this is quite a difficult process, but typically, as I say, you don't need to know more about it because it's all automated and you can get people to do that for you as a leader. But what you need to know is that that's a step that will have to be done if you're looking at very complex systems, and most of the time it's just straightforward. Again, nothing to be afraid of. Vision is similarly, we can use those knowledge models. So for example, the thing that I was just talking about can tell whether it's a dog or a bird, because birds have got feathers and they've got beaks and they've got wings, whereas dogs have got 4 legs and are hairy. So vision capabilities are currently very, very strong. We have an amazing set of tools available. So Microsoft, Google, and company offer up these amazingly well-trained things that you can fire images in, and it'll come back and tell you what's in them. You can do facial recognition, of course, but you can also do product recognition and other things. So what you need to know out of this is that the vision APIs that are there are very strong, and that you can use these to do vision recognition. So you can point a camera on the phone at something and it will come back and tell you what that is, the thing is. And that changes the interactions. Go back to the vision. How do we make it easier to use stuff? How do we augment the human? Don't make them enter things. Let the computer work out what it is. Now, we've all heard about chatbots. Chatbots are kind of low-hanging fruit in the world of AI, if you see what I mean. They are relatively easy things to put together, and particularly because there are several chatbot frameworks out there, and there's tools that sit on top of them. So chatbot is something where instead of having to figure out how to work with the computer, it talks to you and it listens to you, and it doesn't quite behave like a human, but it certainly gives the impression of human intelligence if it's done properly. And all of this stuff fits on top of machine learning. And the machine learning, again, this is something that has been going on for a very, very long time. If you hear people talking about deep neural networks, you should know that they were invented in 1942, and it's only recently that they've become usable as compute power becomes available. So it's really a long history there, and it's finally become something very powerful. But you don't need to understand how it works. You just need to know that you have to teach it. Now, this is a key element of
Richard, can I just pop
Sure.
in and ask some questions? We've had quite a lot of questions come in
Okay,
over
sure. Fire
getting
away.
over that fear that you've been talking about, this fear of technology.
Okay.
Especially when you start talking about Alexa and the voice recognition, because I know quite a few people are fearful of the idea of everything being recorded. And, you know, one thing in your home, but in your office, how do we ensure that if we embrace this technology that we're not putting ourselves and our businesses at risk?
Well, that is a very, very difficult thing to deal with. And I think the current stuff that we're seeing with Facebook and its frankly flagrant disregard for privacy, it's an entirely justified question. So GDPR is generally seen as something that's going to be very difficult and challenging for companies to comply with correctly, because it is difficult to comply with it because we haven't had to do so before. So GDPR is your friend. And the question, are these devices recording everything? Well, that's a good, you know, to be brutally honest, the suppliers, Amazon and the others, they don't necessarily tell you what's being recorded and what's not being recorded. So it is a perfectly justifiable fear. So GDPR is going to be very helpful here. Now, in terms of looking at it from a corporate point of view, recording that information. So the question I would say is, many organizations already do record everything they do. So investment banking, for example, everything has to be recorded so that you can come back and check it. I kind of ask the question, why is it a problem to record everything? Now the question then is, it depends on who's looking at it. So if it's being recorded locally or anonymized, it's not too much of an issue. But if people suddenly can gain access to it, then that's a big issue. I think this is a good question to ask any supplier, and it is something to be aware of, but I wouldn't let it get in the way of trying things out and deploying it.
And then sort of leading on from, the home versus the workplace, in your consultancy, have you seen
Mm-hmm.
that people are more willing to adapt to technology at home first, or are they adapting to it in the workplace first?
Actually, what usually happens is that consumer drives enterprise, and this is exactly what happened with mobile. So the if the typical enterprise system was being downloaded from an app store, they would be getting 0 stars as ratings and people ranting about how terrible they are. Um, Typical enterprise software is horrible, and it always has been, and it's only slowly getting better. So what happens is that people get used to using things at home because their home technology is often better than the technology they use at work, particularly if you work for a large corporate. And therefore, they get used to better quality, better experiences, better capabilities at home. So yes, I do think that home drives it. It is called the consumerization of IT, generally speaking. And you can see that in the way that the appearance of software is improving and the interaction is getting better for most cases. And recent versions of things are much better. The other thing that happens is that consumer systems get updated far more frequently than enterprise ones. So it sets an expectation that I have all this stuff at home. When I come into work, it suddenly becomes quite difficult because I have to go back to using this old thing. So yeah, definitely starts at home. It starts with things like, if you don't have a smartwatch on, then you probably don't understand the benefits you can get from wearables or not, depending on your point of view. And similarly, if you have devices, and let's use another one here, that's Amazon. That's a Google Home Mini, which I have on my desk here. These are great things to play around with at home and just become familiar with it. So, yeah, definitely starts at home, and it drives an expectation because even if you're not using it as a more senior person in the organization, you will find that your more junior employees will be doing this, and they'll come to work and they're going to say, why can't I do this by voice? Or why can't I do this in mobile? Because they're doing it at home. And usually use Facebook as an example. A lot of people use Facebook to organize their social lives, and it's very good at managing groups, but when they come to work, they don't have tools like that, and that's driving the socialization of work because it comes from the consumer space. So mobile and social are two examples of where that has already happened, and voice is definitely coming.
Richard, I'm going to ask one more question and save the
Sure.
rest till after the
Okay.
next section,
Sure.
because it leads on with what you were just saying about using things from the home and maybe younger generations
Mm-hmm.
understanding and adapting to technology
Mm-hmm.
because it's all around them. You've listed 8 things in front of us. It's
Mm-hmm.
quite a lot to
Yeah.
research, understand, know about.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there's many places that you could spend hours in your entire day trying to comprehend all this new technology. So finding the right technology for your company, how
Mm-hmm.
would you recommend? Would you recommend sort of having a small group of people that are dedicated to this, or how would you recommend getting your head around learning about this and finding the right technology for you?
Okay, well, first of all, as a leader, you don't need to know how it works. You just need to know some of the capabilities. And having a small team of people who are dedicated and interested to rolling those things out is absolutely the right way to go. Interestingly, at Chelsea Apps Factory, we just had an AI workshop yesterday afternoon where we brought in the people from the team who were particularly interested in it and weren't out at customer sites. And it was immensely useful in the shared learning. So that kind of collaboration, so the culture of collaboration and a culture of communication is hugely important. So don't expect to be able to understand everything here. I certainly don't understand everything here. I know what it does roughly, and I know roughly how it works because I'm a techie, but you don't need to do that. The main reason for looking at these 8 building blocks is to know that when somebody comes back and goes blah, 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 deep neural network, blah, 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 chatbot, blah, 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 that what you should really be thinking is, what's it for? And how can I use it? And how can I benefit from it? In order to do that, you need to have a little bit of there. So having some kind of special interest group, advisory panel, whatever you want to call it, just even regular workshops is a tremendously important way to get started in that and get over that hump of fear.
Great. Richard, I'll let you get through the next section and then fill up with some more questions.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, I get enthusiastic and keep talking. So Okay, so moving on into the vision section, and how do we create that vision? Well, it's really important from a usability point of view to look at this being a technology that turns everything upside down. So you could say that when the IBM PC came out, it changed the way we interacted with computers irreparably. No, that's not the right word. It changed it irrevocably because people suddenly had direct access. They didn't have to go through intermediaries. So what AI is doing in many ways, especially in the world of chatbots and these interactive technologies like the voice, is that it's turning the model upside down. It means that the computer learns how you work rather than you having to figure out how to use the software. And that is a huge change in the way that you design things. And this, I think, is probably the most inspiring level for creating a vision. How can we make stuff easier to use? Because easier to use means we make less mistakes, means we can do more. It means that you get, if you're selling to people, that more people complete the transaction. If you're working internally, it means that people fill in timesheets or put over whatever corporate data is in more efficiently. And that is a fundamental thing. So we are changing the nature of the interaction so that it is doing a lot of the filling in for you. And one of the areas that, in terms of identification, that works incredibly well is looking for repetitive tasks. So going back to the how do we get started question, and it's like, what's the best way to learn about these things? I would say the best way of looking at it is, what tasks do we do that are very time consuming, that require a degree of, for example, let's talk about recruitment as an example. So a recruiter spends a lot of time mining sources such as LinkedIn, looking for people with the correct talent, identifying them, commenting on them, etc. That is very repetitive, and it only requires a certain element of human intelligence to do at least part of the job. So what we can do is we can use AI to do that scanning, identifying the right people, and then leaving the human to confirm it and then talk to that person. So that's a beautiful example of human augmentation. There's lots of other things. So scrubbing data, for example. That will probably be foremost in a lot of people's minds around GDPR. So do we know that we have approval from all of our people that we contact to know that we're allowed to talk to them? So repetitive tasks that require a degree of thinking are super ripe for AI, and it's a great way to get started. So here's a few examples that you're probably not aware of as being AI, but are tremendously helpful. So if you use Gmail or LinkedIn or a couple of other tools, they have things called smart replies. And so Gmail smart replies are the automatic things, that's the blue boxes across the bottom there, that say, yeah, that's great, or no thank you, or let's talk about it, or they've read the email and it's worked out what your most probable responses are. That's done with AI, but it's very non-intrusive. And amazingly, 13% of all replies sent using Gmail use the smart replies. And in the case of one of the major consultancies, this has saved 12,000 hours, billable hours of work last year, just using these automated replies. Another example is Box, is a file sharing system. Box, it's a bit like Dropbox, if you're not familiar with it. It's one enterprise file sync and share. And Box has all sorts of AI capabilities built into it so that it can recognize what the content is. But it also does stuff such as identifying that every day at 2 o'clock, you open the sales forecast spreadsheet so that 2 o'clock every day, it floats it up the top of the list of files that you have, so you don't have to go looking for it. So it can spot those patterns. And there are software tools out there called RPA, Robotic Process Automation, that help you build these things, that identify it so you can create patterns. And these things, low-hanging fruit, again, this doesn't require vast amounts of data. It doesn't really require you to understand the technologies behind it. But if you think about something that you're doing every day and it doesn't produce an enormous amount of additional value for your human processes, these are great things to start automating. An example is contact centers, whether it's text or emails or phone call center. 80% of those contacts are the same set of things. So any contact center manager will know exactly what the top 3, if not the top 10 requests are, and they take 80% of the time. So what you can do is use bots to do that. So it's a beautiful example of optimizing a common cost center. So let the bots handle the common cases, and then you can leave your humans to focus on the difficult cases. And so, example, in a pensions company, the most common call for a pensions company is, how much money will I have when I retire? And there are people who phone up every week to ask that question. Now, automating that either through voice or through text becomes a almost human face for that, and it saves enormous amounts of effort in your call center. Typical repetitive task doesn't really require human intelligence to do that, so it's a beautiful case of using AI. Now, how do we prioritize these things? It's a big question. You can go out and very often people have pet projects they want to do. Otherwise, there are things that they know that are pain points. So how do we assess which are the most important ones? How do we know which are the most painful bits, and how do we know which are the personal favorites rather than something that's genuinely going to give us benefit? Well, this is a very simple tool that I've used for a long time with mobility. It works for AI as well. So horizontal axis is operational frequency, and the vertical axis is either the cost or the value of the transaction. So if you're doing something frequently and it costs you a lot of time and effort or makes a lot of money, then that's an area where you can start augmenting and get the highest possible value out of it. Similarly, if you have something that's very high cost that you only do occasionally, that's a good thing to do. Or something that you're doing very, very frequently, but doesn't cost a lot, that again is something that is worth doing. But if you've got something that sits down there in that gray box, which is the operational cost is low and the operational frequency is very low, then that's not worth automating. Now, this is a very simple tool that we used for mobility for a long time to identify what are the highest value. So if you're selling online, then having a mobile app makes a lot of sense because you're sitting up there in the high value, high frequency. If you've got couriers arriving, as another example, people delivering parcels, the app that scans the barcode that tells the system that the parcel's been delivered, that's down in the high frequency, low value category. Very useful, but not particularly costly thing to do, but it's that's a secondary thing to do. And then so there are lots of projects that people think might be a good idea, but once you start looking at them with this rational thought process, then you see it's not particularly valuable. So this is a helpful tool to get you started on it. Another thing that's very important is to look at your smart personality. So are you casual? Are you a hipster? Are you somebody who's very formal? How do you address your clients when you're a chatbot? So do you say, Miss Baker, or do you say, hi, Catherine? It's that style of interaction is very important, and it's an extension of your existing brand work. And this is going to become increasingly important as we start interacting automatically with people. It's also important internally. So what's the face that you want your HR services, for example, to have faced internally? Building that personality is something that's very different from normal marketing and normal software development processes, and it's something that will result in having leaders in markets where there's a lot of customer interaction. That is an example of what we consider to be the first step in the journey into AI. It's the creation of customer enhancements. So three-step process. Any organization has this boiling magma in the middle of it of valuable data, which is typically sitting around in places that you can't put it together and can't draw conclusions from it. So how are we going to use AI to do that, to draw those valuable competitive advantage type conclusions? Well, you start off by doing something else to get familiar, excuse me, to overcome that fear hump. So we're going to start off with the superficial things, the easy things. So, for example, call center augmentation is a good example. That's something that can let people not wait for 20 minutes but talk to the bot. Various US airlines have experimented with this, that if you put a thing on your call center, wait, hold music that says, instead of doing this, you could use the SMS us the question or use the chatbot to ask the question. That's actually proven to be very popular with users. It gives you small benefits, but it gives you them immediately, and you can start learning from them. You can see what works, what doesn't work. Similarly, you can do the same thing for employee productivity. So start giving tools that make people's work life faster, more efficient. And then this just builds up this knowledge about how these things can really benefit us. How do we use our data? How do we work with the data? And then we go forwards into this much more complicated world, but we've already been trained in understanding how these tools work. And this is something that we do at CAF with people. We have these challenge workshops that start looking at those kind of questions and prioritization. So day one, you look at some problems And this matches very nicely into the how do you get started. So you pull people together and you look at the problems that you can face, and you think about how can we build these out, and then you figure out which ones you want to look at, you can build it, and then you have actually experiment with it at the end of the week. This is a great way to learn about it. We've proven this with a lot of different systems. We can work with you, or you can do these things yourselves, but it's focusing on delivering something to experiment, to get over that fear, to start working successfully with it. So I hope this has given you some insight into the fact that AI is coming in a way. It's going to be very disruptive, and it's better to drive that disruption yourself, to grasp it and lead forward with nimble leadership that is taking a clear vision that helps people to get somewhere. Now, that vision isn't going to appear magically. It's something you have to work at, and it's an area where we can start building technology together, as bring people in, ignore formal reporting lines, gather that group of people who are enthused and excited by it, and ensure that you don't terrify other people by building up a level of confidence that you can deliver this, and it is going to be an amazing transformative experience. It's going to make people's work lives better. And that is the key element of the leadership, is to get us through this change without major disruption and upset. We need strong leaders with that smart vision.
Right, Richard, excellent. I mean, you really are making the case that artificial intelligence and technology is going to make our lives better and easier and stop us from doing those mundane, annoying, boring tasks that we put at the very end of our to-do list.
Yes.
We've had a few questions still coming through with yes, this sounds great, but especially when you talk about the bots, for an example, and calling into call centers now where you do have that automated process that goes on forever, and it takes a very long time to possibly talk to somebody when you do need to be talking to somebody, and that isn't really enhancing the customer experience. So how do you find the line between enhancing the business, processes and procedures and cutting costs, but when it actually starts to harm your customers and the technology isn't maybe there yet?
Well, the beauty of using the chatbots is there's never any delay, because you don't have to wait to speak to somebody. It is a transformational process. Now, nobody likes press 1 for something you don't want, dial 2 for something you don't want, etc. process. Now, this is where the whole thing of using the chatbot, understanding what you want, comes in, so that the AI, the learning part of a chatbot, is that it figures out what you're trying to ask for, so you don't have to work it out yourself. And we've all had the experience of connecting into some call center where you cannot find the option you want, and then you have to wait for ages, and then you've been told you're on the wrong person and it's passed over. So I think that the future will be that people will interact very much through either the voice interfaces of the Alexa type systems, and the Alexa system will figure out very quickly whether it can help or not, or it will come back and say, you should be speaking to a human, I'm transferring you over now. And a very important element of this is that chat systems mustn't pretend that they're real humans behind it, because that creates a very bad expectation level that you will not meet the expectation and it will fail. So what I would say is that rolling these things out needs to be done carefully. You need to try it and test it and make sure that it's learning. You need to monitor it. It's not something that just drops in ready built. And one of the things that's very important here is the overall service design. What are the outcomes that you're trying to manage? What are the things that you think you can do? Make sure that you are not excluding people who are uncomfortable with it, and you're not stopping people getting to humans when they need them. So I'm not entirely sure if that answered the question, but because it's a very large-scale question about how do you change your whole profile of contact points.
Well, it sounds like we've just got to slowly start to embrace technology, and eventually it will start to do all the things that we want it to do and to be more of an early adapter.
Yeah.
And so the final question I'm going to have, because I realize we're almost out of time, Richard, is in convincing people. So if we are leaders and we want to take this technology and we want to embrace AI and get it into our teams and our functions, you mentioned that there's lack of confidence at the very beginning of your talk. What are just one or two key areas that as leaders we can help explain to people to kind of combat that lack of confidence and give them confidence in trying this new technology?
Well, I think this matches very nicely with the question of how do you build that group of people, so that it's demonstrating that it's not about, well, maybe it is about replacing people in call center terms. That I think that you just have to communicate very clearly what you're doing, encourage people to try stuff themselves. We talk a lot about the art of the possible, fairly standard sales technique, demonstrating the art of the possible. Maybe you can have a drop-in lab somewhere in your business where people can come and play with the technology themselves, so that you might have an online resource within your business that shows what you're thinking of doing and what the outcomes are. Let people contribute to it. And this kind of workshop process and letting people know that they can contribute to it, and let people know that their ideas are valued, because this is somewhere where we're looking for people who have insight. And very often the people who are on the edges of the business, interacting with clients and suppliers, will actually know a lot more about that interaction process, and they will know where those pain points are that can be automated a lot better than the people in the leadership team do, because often we end up in the leadership team being isolated from those pain points. So openness, communication, again, this is all very generic. It's not specific to AI. It's just how do you introduce new technology without terrifying people, is this inclusivity. And it's, as I say, particularly the people at the edges who may well have deep insight into it, include them. So the people whose direct activities will be impacted by these changes need to be included in the process of defining what they are. So I know we're out of time, so I could wax lyrical about this topic for hours.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much, Richard. For those of you that are on the line with us, we are out of time at the moment. But Richard, if you just get to the next slide, if anybody has any questions, wants to get in touch with either Richard or myself about leadership, artificial intelligence, how to enhance your life with technology, or just enhance your leadership styles, please do get in touch with either Richard or myself. And I'll just leave you with that old adage that whatever got you here isn't going to get you there. So we really do need to be thinking about technology in the future and how we're going to embrace it, as opposed to maybe run away from it. So again, thank you very much, Richard, for your time today, and everyone for attending this webinar. And please do be in touch with any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you.